Cascade of pure water, tumbling down, falling.
I begin in the snowfields of the North Cascade Mountains. Continually reborn, I flow from the Similkameen and Toulameen Rivers in British Columbia. I merge with my other major tributaries, which come from the Ashnola and Pasayten Rivers flowing out of the Pasayten Wilderness of the North Cascades in Washington. My ultimate destination is the Okanogan River, then the Columbia, and eventually the Pacific Ocean. But I am impounded by a dam which does not allow for the natural distribution of nutrients, gravels, and sediment, my purpose in flowing from the mountains to the sea. My tributaries are international, extending north and south across the United States border with Canada. It is the largest watershed in the western Columbia River Basin, encompassing 3,000 square miles. My neighbor, the Methow River, drains an area of 1,900 square miles. As I collect waters from snowmelt and upwelling springs, I bring life to many places. Our relationships are intimate, sensual, and spiritual. I touch countless stones, plants, and animals. I bring nutrient-rich sediments from my mountain and forest origins to all of the lands below. I nourish micro and macro invertebrates and plants. They, in turn, feed fish, birds, mammals, and all of the riverine life that depend upon me for existence.
The upper and lower Similkameen Indian bands have natural laws of responsibility. These laws are guides in caring for water, the earth, air, vegetation, and all of creation.
And we look at our protocols that we follow that began in the beginning. Some of you went to the halls this morning there was a prayer said in that, and the legends that were talked about in that time. I said there's even protocols around that, when you can tell those stories and hand out those kind of disciplines. And there's all the different kinds of ceremonies that we have for water. One of the things that we look at, we always fight for and against is fish passage in the Similkameen. The story goes that we weren't allowed to have that. We faced a lot of injustices through our lives. We're in a state of recovery. We're in a state of reteaching our young people. We're opening our own schools and hearing about like the water ceremonies, like I said, has to be done every year. Every time we pick a berry, the first one, the first handful, there's a protocol. How you even drink out of a stream as a person has a protocol. In Canada, we never ceded our land. We never gave it to nobody. We never said to somebody that you can have it. And yet we're subjugated to laws that we can't look after our land the way it was done. Prior to, I think they're cut off up there, they call 1846. Our people burned the land. There was no species at risk. It's all a responsibility. It's a right. It's a right that we have. And it's also a responsibility. And that a lot of the governing people don't understand that. I get up every day, not as an elected leader or anybody, but as somebody that was taught and somebody that has a responsibility to pass that knowledge on to my children and the children of the community.
This river is the lifeline of this valley, and that's what I was always taught. It's precious. I treat it as being precious. I swim in it every year. I swim in it all year. But we all have big concerns. One of my concerns right now is the tributaries that are going into the Similkameen. I worry about the mine. That spill that went in top into Wolf Creek. A lot of people don't know about it, but those tailings, they're still there. They're not cleaned up fully yet. You know, then you look at Mascot, you look at the Headley Creek that flows in. It's got super high levels of arsenic and everything. You know, it's sad when I start thinking about it, and I love this river, and I just wish we could protect it more. I'd do everything I can to protect this river.
Since the melting of the glaciers 10,000 years ago, the tributaries of the Similkameen have flowed out of the North Cascade Mountains. Year after year, for thousands of years, they have carved deep canyons and deposited fertile mineral soils along the west-east Similkameen River Valley. A group of Lower Similkameen band members have been working on protecting the watershed of the Similkameen River to restore and ensure its continuity. In addition to the Indian bands, other Canadian groups are also watching and caring about what happens to the Similkameen watershed. They are mindful of the mining history and plans for damming the upper Similkameen for power and water storage.
The Similkameen River system goes up into the Toulameen. So our work really is, I work right now in an area, parks, park reserve work. I worked 10 years prior to that with the Enloe Center, which is a cultural educational institution for the northern part of our tribe in Canada, in the Okanogan Nation. And a lot of the work that was done there really, and the information, the archives, relates to some of the historical work on the river system, and on not just the river system, but all of the cultural knowledge. We have to obey the laws of the land. In our early creation stories, they told us, go and learn from the land. And so when Coyote makes those laws and he puts those monuments in those places, we understand that that's the law of the land. And the Creator gave us that direction at the time of creation in our creation stories to go and to learn from the land. So when Coyote made those laws, we live and die by those laws.
We follow our own traditional, I don't like to say protocol, but it's just, to us, it's not a protocol. It's something that we do. We do things a certain way, and that's just the way that it's done. And that's something that never changes. Even when we take a salmon out, we talk to them. Like people say, we just talking to a dead fish, or the deer and stuff like that. But for us, anything that has a heart to us has meaning to it. Even the tree has a heart. Anything exposed, to us, it's got life. It's got feelings that comes from here, the heart.
In my role as the environment coordinator, my work was to access funding and work with, conservation organizations and other groups that had interests in and around conservation work to do with species at risk, the unique biodiversity that we find here in the Similkameen, as well as the community was very much concerned about our river. And the Similkameen River runs all through the reserve area of the community, and the portions of the river that run through the reserve are the most natural reaches of the Similkameen. They're the reaches that are still allowed to have meanders. They're the areas that still have some connectivity between the wetlands and the creek systems and the river system. So there's still all of these species of significance, of cultural significance and unique significance to the area that are only found within the reserve boundaries in these water areas. One of the main goals was to engage with the knowledge keepers in the community. A lot of the work that we did was around restoration. So we're doing restoration of the meander bends of the river. The word from the community was they did not want to see hard riprap. They did not want to see us shoring up our river. They wanted the river to continue to feed the back eddies and to support the biodiversity. So all of the work that we've done was to bring back the ability of the river to be free and yet still support the agricultural and the other uses that were happening along the river. Down below, we know that the reintroduction below the dam from the Colville tribes, their concern has been the sedimentation that is caused by the agricultural uses and all of these upstream effects. So the work has been found to be really important in being able to reduce that sedimentation and those impacts downstream that we know flow down into Palmer Lake and down below. People recognize the value of the indigenous understanding of the land and the way the land was managed by the people before colonization and before the impacts of settler came along and started putting up fences and started putting up, hard riprap and started, making these changes on the land that impacted the ability of the land to care for itself with its natural systems. And we continue to try and build these relationships and bring people together around the water, around the fish, around our keystone species, grizzly bear and our mule deer and our ungulates. So really it's about the connection of the land, the people, the timi, and the water.
My name is Rob Edward in English. I guess tagged with a name or a position of a knowledge keeper. But what I know about Enloe is that we've always fought for it because it's our law to do that. So when we look at our Zaptic, when we get all our laws that we stand up all the time or stand behind all the time, and my brother talked about, when the fish would come over the dam, even before this dam was put up, they call that chachas supl. They made themselves sacred and they came over the dam, and it was a test to our people that when they see salmon in the upper reaches of the Similkameen is that you can walk down the river and catch salmon, but then you also break the law. It also talks about our territory. Like I said, we border with the Okanogan there and our Orville area. And fishing talks about that. It gave the salmon to each of the bands or the tribes or however they recognize themselves, and even the sharing part. When we look at it, coming up the river, it passes through a lot of hands and goes through a lot of area. But each one of them has to ensure that the Similkameen get salmon, and each one of those have to ensure the Okanogan get salmon. So when we look at that, I said, if one says, well, we have this right, which is different than what we call responsibility. The responsibility for our neighbors is just as important up here as it is from them down there, because we already understood that the salmon came from what we call Silhuit, the big ocean or the big water, and the effect that we have up here. And we talk about that all the time. Forestry impacts our river, which was the coldest contributing to the Columbia and the Okanogan. And so we look at that, I guess, interdependency on each other, on maintaining our lands for our food. We look at our land as it has law. So it's always a reminder to us that, here's what the land is telling you, but this predecesses us, as people. So they laid the law down on the land, and then we were torn from the land, the water, and the meal. And we're a part of it. So every time we think about things, we think everything we do is ceremonial. It's not a right. It's a responsibility we have to undertake. And if that responsibility isn't undertaken, then we lose it. Not because government says you can't do it, because that food is gone. So when we think about things like that, we're talking about forestry, we're talking about mining, we're talking about range, we're talking about all these things that have impacts to us. And we also have to bring that up to our economy now, because our people are miners, they're foresters, they're range, they utilize range, they're in the tourism, they're modern people. But how do we find the balance to that? Because we're trying to find that balance with our little brother. And that's a Zaptic also. It's not just Canadian. You know, we call the white people our little brother because they showed up in 1492. It's because in Arctic they were the little brothers.
My name is Mary Maciel, and I have lived in Princeton for about 40 years. And I have been very much involved with the Similkameen River. I was actively involved when they tried to build a coal-fired generating plant that would have affected the river, and we won that particular battle. And then we had a coal bed methane scare. I guess it can still be possible. Again, it would have affected the river, and we won that particular battle. The last battle, as part of the Friends of the Similkameen West, was to stop the building of a dam on the Similkameen River. And it was a dam that was going to be built above a canyon as part of a Copper Mountain mine. There's a canyon, and the dam was going to be built there. It made no sense because the next tributary for the Similkameen is the Toulameen, which brings in a lot of water. But the dam was going to be before that particular tributary joined the river. It wasn't so much a thing for electrification. It was going to be for water storage. And it was going to be built by the Fortis Exploration and Investment Group of Fortis, and that did not sit well with people that are along the Similkameen, because they were not going to get any sort of benefits from the river. It was going to be strictly a venture for Fortis Exploration to make money for itself and benefit the Americans to the south. At all times, we have to keep our eye and ear open as to what is happening with the Similkameen. The Similkameen is a free-flowing river in Canada. There are no dams or anything to obstruct its flow, and we would like to keep it that way.
I'm Lee McFadden. I live right beside the Similkameen River and have done for the last 50 years, and during that period have noted many changes. Several years ago, a mine just upstream from me, or an old closed mine site, put up a notice saying that they were going to do remedial action on their tailings pond. Well, the remedial action turned out to be waste material from the Metalex battery recycling plant in Richmond being put on top of the tailings. And it was truly toxic waste. A group of people that lived south and around the area got together and put together an ad hoc committee and called ourselves Friends of the Similkameen. Fortunately, the Ministry of the Environment declared the material that had been dumped as toxic waste very quickly, and the company had a cease and desist order, but it took 3 years to actually work its way through the different levels of government and have their permit to drop this at the site permanently pulled. And after that we realized that a small group of people can actually have quite an effect when there is an important issue. Up in Princeton they wanted to put an incinerator to burn waste from the lower mainland, and they were going to use coal from the coal mine up above Coalmont in the Toulameen. The people of Princeton didn't want this, and we didn't want it either. We were now moving from the water in our Similkameen shed to the air in our watershed, and if the air is affected, ultimately the water is going to be affected. So we collaborated with the people of Princeton and the other communities downstream, Headley, Terrameas, and people in between, and we actually had that whole proposal squashed. A proposal to put a dam on the Similkameen immediately below Copper Mountain Mine resurfaced. We had gone through this some years previously when Princeton Light and Power provided power to the Princeton area, and we squashed that. and this time it was Fortis. And Fortis applied for water rights, and as far as I know, the water rights are still on the books. I'm not sure that they have actually been granted, but they're still there. And while the proposal several years ago did not move ahead, I think that was more for financial reasons than anything else, and I have no doubt that the proposal will resurface at some point in the future. Some people feel that to store water would be a good thing because the Similkameen can get very low in the summertime. A lot of demands on the Similkameen's water, a lot of irrigation and domestic use, not direct domestic use directly from the river, but domestic use through wells all along the river, which draw water from the water table, which is that water table is inextricably linked with the river. And some people feel that maybe to store water would be a good thing. And perhaps it would, but not in a major dam right on the river. Perhaps some minor dams like we used to have on Otter Lake and up on the Chain Lakes. Maybe that would better serve us to slowly release water through the dry months. But a major dam on the river is not a good idea for many, many reasons. We'd like to see, myself and I think most people, friends and other people in the community, would like to see the river remain a free-running river. There are very few rivers in BC that actually are free-running. In Canada, the Similkameen does have a dam on it below the border, and finally, after many, many years of discussion and debate and even argument, the Utilities Commission that was applying to re-electrify that dam, they've pulled their permit, and that's not going to go ahead. And I think it would be a very good thing for the river if that dam was removed and the river could become a true free-running river. There's an intrinsic value in the river in itself. We look at it as a resource or an asset, and of course it is. It's a resource to every living thing. It provides us with water. If you like, it could be called the lifeblood of the valley. Anything that happens to the river really affects everything that lives along that river. So keeping it healthy, keeping it free-flowing, keeping its riparian areas healthy are very, very important. And just a few words about the riparian areas. We sometimes lose sight of how important those riparian areas are. And settlers, of course, tended to settle close to the river because it was reduced the work of packing water, and that's very understandable. And then riparian areas and marshes and wetlands have been drained, and we've lost a lot of them. And people tend to forget the very, very important role that they play in recharging the water table, in cleansing the water, in maintaining a healthy ecosystem along the river. On the years that we have very high waters, those areas flood. And people don't like it very much because they might have a house in the way of the flood, or they very likely have farmers' fields in the way of the flood. And that can be a real annoyance. It doesn't happen very often, but it can be a real annoyance. But the greater role of the river to the water table, to this very, very important lifeblood, is possibly more important than an inconvenience and the unpleasantness of flood. And I fully sympathize with people when their house is flooded, but perhaps we need to be a little more thoughtful before we go ahead and do some of the development we do, change where we do the development. Of course, it's too late in a lot of instances, so we have to put up with the inconvenience.
During the spring freshet, this results in erosion and delivering additional contaminants to the Similkameen River. Again, citizens are watching and caring for their river because increased erosion and excessive sediment will reduce the productivity for both vertebrates and invertebrates.
Cascade of pure water tumbling down
As I cross the Canadian-U.S. border, I become an international river. I'm joined by a unique tributary that flows through several sloughs connected to my main channel. Palmer Creek flows into Palmer Lake, creating wetlands during my swollen spring flows. The wetlands empty when my waters are low. Palmer Lake can rise and fall 12 feet during this time, inundating Similkameen Creek at the south end of Palmer Lake.
They renamed the drain to Palmer Lake, Palmer Creek. So we have this whole basin down there, to what I call Chapaka Basin. They're full of channels and sloughs and old abandoned oxbows. And it's a haven for wildlife. And then when the high waters come and the spring melt, which sometimes comes as early as April, but more commonly in May, the highest waters are then light those channels up, or at least it lights the Edwards Channel up, and the Edwards Channel comes into the Palmer Creek and it reverses the flow of Palmer Creek.
My flow was slowed down in 1920s when Enloe Dam was built, approximately 9 miles upriver from where I joined the Okanogan River. The dam generated electricity from 1923 to 1958. Then it became cheaper to get power generated by the Columbia River. Enloe Dam has sat in my riverbed without purpose for 61 years. Its presence blocks any migration up or down my length by aquatic life.
In 2007, the Washington State Department of Ecology was looking for ways to reduce stress on aquifers in the Columbia River Basin. In the search for additional water storage, the long-standing high dam site proposal at Shanker's Bend on the Similkameen River was revived. The 260-foot-tall dam would be constructed about a mile upriver from Enloe Dam. This dam would flood the town of Nighthawk and surrounding farmland, including all the property around Palmer Lake and farmland up the Similkameen Creek to the town of Loomis. The dam would alter 9,000 acres of riverine habitat, lakes, farmland, and abandoned mine sites in British Columbia. This dam would provide constant water flow to generate power by the smaller Enloe Dam, making it plausible to have a constant production of electricity. The proposal to construct the dam at Shanker's Bend was not popular among area residents and Canadians. In 2014, the Okanogan Public Utility District again sought a license from the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission to electrify Enloe Dam. To secure their license in 2016, the Public Utility District spent $14.6 million on lawyers, lobbyists, and court challenges to water flows and rights. Re-energizing Enloe would prevent all but a small amount of water flowing over Similkameen Falls below the dam during low water flows. The indigenous people of the Similkameen River have used Similkameen Falls as a spiritual vision quest site as well as for fishing. The presence of the dam and the likelihood of toxic sediment damages the value of the river and its livelihood. Consequently, the spiritual nature and traditional uses of the falls are marginalized.
I remember being there, being younger, and sitting there with Teresa Ann Tarasket, and we're talking about the fish. And we're talking about looking at the bowls that are dug out into the rocks there, and she talked about the guardians of that place, that there are guardians there. It's a sacred place for the people because of the law that our elders talk about that was made by Coyote, and how he made this law for the Similkameen people. And he left his daughter as well as a reminder to the people in the water there. And there's a big rock up in the northern part of that area that is Coyote's daughter. So that place, as it's the sacredness of it, is related to the laws that were created there. Coyote came through and he made these laws about salmon, and he was bringing salmon, and that was his directive from the Creator. And we live by those laws. We live and die by those laws.
You know, as Native people, we suffered a long time. And there was a lot of treaties that were made, and there were a lot of treaties that were broken. But we got to think about our elders and the ones that used to lead our ceremonies, and how they were forced to make treaties. And these are the last things that our people, the last stronghold that we have is to say what little we have. Our natural resources are so important to retain them, to sustain them. Our leaders have to come together and make a voice to sustain our treaty rights. We were forced to lose our language, but through the power of the creator of the Mauna, we're still here today representing the sacrifices that our ancestors made. And we got to think about the future generations to come. We got to think about not just our grandchildren, but our great and great-grandchildren that still have the treaty to grasp onto, to exercise our rights as fishermen, as food gatherers, as to go out off the reservations to gather and harvest. There's a lot of different issues going on with this water. And it represents a lot of things, a lot of beautiful things that we have to grasp onto.
My ability to flow is literally the gift of life, not just for me, but for all of the creatures whose lives I touch. I bring water, nutrients, cooling, and habitat for countless relatives. I also redistribute soil and sediments that nourish farmland, crops, and the people and livestock who depend on them.
Good day, my name is Wendy. I live here in the Ashnola. I have the Ashnola River flowing alongside of me, and then down below I have the beautiful Similkameen. A natural river system, one that's unencumbered by dams or any other structures in the area, is one that's free-flowing and allowed to grow naturally. The plants that grow along the river more often than not are the medicines and the foods that we utilize. Too many times developments and homes go in, and the first thing that happens is they denude the riverbanks. Often that's bringing about the erosion that occurs in some of those banks and actually puts people and homes in danger. But the free-flowing river, it's bringing soils and minerals and things that are good for the river, things that are good for the valley bottoms, and even the high water has a job. The high water comes in and often scours out things that aren't supposed to be there and transports them further downstream. What's sad about today is that so many times that's including garbage and other things that we as humans introduce to the environment. So when I stand next to a free-flowing river like the Similkameen or the tributary to Ashnola, the Pasayten and Toulameen, I look at it and just appreciate it, number one, for its strength and its beauty, but also because of the gifts that it provides for our people and the things that we still continually utilize and rely on.
In Chais Huiden, Tali Sapi, Lapistim at Wixen, Lapistim, Ihulam, Itumhula, Ihulamana, Coach Prat, Coach Eat Latlaki. I have seen the greatest changes just this last little while, the last years. The things that's been happening, it's been gradual, but it's also predicted by our ancestors of what we would expect. It's like buying water was one of them, only one of them. There's many other things that are happening. The weather is crazy. This is May, it's almost May, and we're having storms, squalls up in the mountains. And that's weird. And back in the day, it would be warm now, and it would, we would probably be all wearing shorts, and today we're not. And I think the worst change that I've seen in my lifetime is the change of the water, the river. I'm very observant of what the river looks like, what it should look like. And that's something that we have to all consider. Whatever we do here, somebody else is doing it somewhere else. And the waters everywhere is so precious. The different things I've seen in just recently. I've seen these fish, and it's scary. The fish has two heads. The other one has one eye where it shouldn't be, and an eye on top of its head. And fish have eyes on the sides of their head. And this is scary. And this is caused by water. This is caused by what's going into our rivers, what's going into our creeks. And it's really scary. So what do we have to do, I think, a lot of times is when we're together like this, is that we think and we pray for the water. We have to all think in terms of what our responsibilities are. It is important that we always tell anybody that will listen to us how important the water is. Without water, we become desert, and we become a desert, even ourselves.
My ability to flow freely is also a necessity for threatened species, such as the Upper Columbia steelhead and bull trout. It is important that isolated mussel larvae can freely migrate up and down my length, cleansing my waters.
There's 4 native mussels in the Okanogan, Similkameen, and Similkameen Creek systems. Those would be the California floater, the western floater, and the western pearl shell, as well as the western ridged mussel. And when I was managing the Similkameen Wildlife Area, I only found 3 of these mussels in Similkameen Creek on the Similkameen Wildlife Area, and those were the California floater, western floater, and western pearl shell. The western ridge mussel was located in Palmer Creek, which is the creek that connects Palmer Lake with the Similkameen River. The life history of the mussels is interesting. The females take in the sperm from the males, and the fertilized eggs developed into what are known as glaucidia, little tiny mussels, and then the female releases the glaucidia into the water, either in I don't know if it's free floating or as a gelatinous form that may resemble food for fish that the particular host fish would think it's food and then get a mouthful of it, and this glaucidia then adheres to the gills and the fish, and where it remains as a parasitic animal for a period of time, and then it drops off into the stream bed and develops into the mature mussel. I don't know that the species of fish that are the hosts to these different mussels have been identified, but we've got a good variety of fish species in the Similkameen Creek and Similkameen.
For all these reasons, the dam that is blocking my flow, while not providing the services of flood control or electricity generation, needs to be removed.
In 2017, the nonprofit organization Trout Unlimited hired a company called Interfluve Incorporated to prepare a provisional plan to remove Enloe Dam and the sediment behind it. Interflu presented the plan to the Okanogan Public Utility District Commissioners. They declined to take action since they had just received their license to build the powerhouse.
During the spring freshet of 2018, melting snows and rainfall swelled my flow. My flow rose from 1,100 cubic feet per second on April 1st to 31,200 cubic feet per second on May 10th. I engulfed Similkameen Falls as I roared down the canyon below Enloe Dam.
The Okanogan Public Utility District spent 5 years trying to find a firm to build their powerhouse. They tried to sell the structure in 2014 with no reasonable offers received. Next, they contracted Energy Northwest to evaluate Okanogan Public Utility District's cost estimate and were told they had underestimated the cost by 40%. The Public Utility District eventually hired a designer-builder contractor who determined the cost would be almost 3 times what they had projected. In the years since securing their license, that $14.6 million has risen to more than $22 million. These unrecovered costs included legal challenges to dewatering the falls, acquisition of water rights to cool waters coming out of the powerhouse, the expenses associated with lobbyists and lawyers to secure their license from the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, and dam safety inspection. Most recently, Okanogan Public Utility District hired Cooney Construction and Tetra Tech to estimate costs of building the powerhouse. The commissioners determined they would not be able to justify to their ratepayers the $87.4 million it would cost. Convinced by Public Utility District staff not to pursue building the powerhouse, the commissioners decided on November 19, 2018, not to undertake the re-electrification of Enloe Dam.
Since the fall of 2019, the Okanogan Public Utility District had yet to meet the safety requirements to ensure that their dam will be able to remain on my riverbed and embedded along my banks safely. If the dam and sediments, which may contain heavy metals or other toxic material, are removed, the cost of dam safety inspections will be foregone, and my own quality of life and of my watershed will be healed.
The dam safety inspection is a requirement of both the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission and the Washington State Department of Ecology. Doing so will cost an estimated $4 to $6 million. Instead, ratepayers passionately advise the Okanogan Public Utility District to pursue sediment and dam removal instead of raising sunk costs to over $22 million. The land on which the dam and associated buildings are located, such as the powerhouse, the penstocks, and water towers, are situated on land managed by the Bureau of Land Management. The Okanogan Public Utility District has a right-of-way agreement with the Bureau of Land Management, which states the Public Utility District must remove the dam and associated structures within 180 days of the termination of their Federal Energy Regulation Commission license. Their license expired July 9, 2019, and was made final on September 19, 2019.
On the question of why WELC got involved in this litigation, to answer that, we need to talk a little bit about the Federal Power Act. The Federal Power Act is designed to promote the public interest by providing a framework for the licensing and regulation of hydroelectric projects that are necessary, economically sound, environmentally responsible, and fit within a comprehensive plan for ensuring that our waterways are able to support beneficial public uses, which include economic activities, but also provide for support of fish and wildlife and recreation. And part of the Act's regulatory structure is that once a project is approved, meaning that it's been determined to be in the public interest, the project is supposed to move forward relatively quickly. Because to
to ensure that those benefits that the hydroelectric project are supposed to provide are realized by the community in some meaningful time. And if the project doesn't move forward, well, then it raises questions about, well, why not, and whether or not the project remains in the public interest. And as a result, Congress put in very specific deadlines that the project proponent must meet. And if it doesn't meet those deadlines, well, then the only recourse that the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, the federal agency that oversees these projects, has is to terminate the license.
Okanogan Public Utility District ratepayers have requested that a Citizens Advisory Committee be sequestered. The committee should represent all ratepayers, low, medium, high-income residential, business, and industrial, to study the projects the Public Utility District chooses to consider. This includes identifying the liabilities and costs of projects for which ratepayers will be held responsible.
I think at this point, the PUD needs to be looking at all the options, taking some time and listening more, I believe, to the opportunities that have been rejected in the past. And then I think a real effort has to be made to bring the public in PUD, Public Utility District, to bring the public into the process. And that's hard to do in this day and age because you can't just call a meeting and expect everybody to show up. They won't show up unless they're mad. And we just do not get them to that point. So I think there has to be a slow, steady process of involving public into the studies and decisions that are being made.
As of the fall of 2019, with mitigation monies from Grant County's Priest Rapids and Wanapum Dams, and sponsorship from the Colville Confederated Tribes, the United States Geological Survey has sampled the sediment which is accumulated behind Enloe Dam. These sediment samples will be analyzed for heavy metals and other toxins, with results available during the fall of 2020. The concentration of toxic material will determine where dredged sediment would be deposited. For years, numerous government agencies and other organizations have tried to convince the Okanogan Public Utility District that Enloe Dam makes no economic sense. They've argued that the dam should be removed to allow the river to return to its natural flow for the benefit of fisheries, recreation, and the health of the entire Similkameen watershed. This has been the view of the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, National Marine Fisheries Service, U.S. and Fish and Wildlife Service, Colville Confederated Tribes, the Lower Similkameen Indian Band, as well as non-governmental organizations such as American Whitewater, American Rivers, Center for Environmental Law Policy, Columbiana, Trout Unlimited, and the Sierra Club.
So a stick dam in the middle of a river substantially changes some of the fundamental physical processes that make a river what it is. First of note is it changes the hydrology downstream of the dam structure itself because it impounds water, and water is only released into the river at the behest of the dam operator. So that's the first problem, and as a result of that, you change significantly the way in which sediment falls into the stream is transported downstream by virtue of the power of the water, the hydraulics of the water flowing downhill in the stream channel. So typically downstream of a dam, you get a lot of coarsening of the materials, and this was certainly the case on the Enloe. It replaced gravels that were sized, that were suitable for spawning, and growth of macroinvertebrate communities on top of them. It replaced all that with stuff that was like bowling ball size, because the hydraulics, when the water was released from the spillway, it's basically just stripped the 4 or 5 miles below the Enloe Dam of all the suitable spawning habitat. Once you've screwed up the hydrology of the river downstream of a dam, and you've changed the sediment transport rates just because you've knocked off the high flow events, then there's a cascade of events that happen that manifest themselves in changes to the ecological communities in the river. You get different macroinvertebrate communities that can result. A lot of the animals, the aquatic animals, really cue in to the natural seasonal cycles of flow in river, and when you interrupt that, it can really change the suitability of that habitat to accommodate their needs.
We have a mission to conserve and restore America's whitewater rivers and to enhance opportunities to enjoy them safely. Similkameen River seems to offer a restoration opportunity with a hydropower project that hasn't operated in decades, and we've had some success around the region in taking older projects that are, for whatever reason, no longer financially viable, and finding ways to restore those rivers. This dam is providing no community benefit, and it's having an ongoing impact on the river, and restoration seemed like a real opportunity here.
Regarding accomplishments, I think that making people aware of what's at stake throughout the region has been hugely important. This has been a long-term effort, in part because Enloe Dam is so far from the large population centers in the state. I think one success that we had early on that has been a good model for us, Jerry Gillespie invited our local Sierra Club group in Spokane to come and look at Enloe Dam and the Similkameen River. This was back in the early 1990s. In the years that have passed since then, we've been involved successfully in bringing one effort after another to protect this river. Notably, local residents have reached out to other ratepayers who are going to be stuck with the bill for bad decision-making. I think a major frustration has been the state of Washington. Through its Department of Ecology and its Office of Columbia River, the state, with the full backing of the Attorney General's office, has been what Charles Wilkinson has described as a lord of yesterday. These lords are forces of the frontier, and as applied to Enloe Dam and the Similkameen River, the lord of yesterday, as manifested by the Office of Columbia River and the Department of Ecology, is an exploiter of rivers and an exploiter of water. As we move forward, as we look into the future in this time of climate change, we recognize that free-flowing rivers are essential to the economy and the ecology of our region. And this is true especially for the Similkameen. The Similkameen is a huge opportunity, and we need to reconnect the lower Similkameen Okanogan with the 90% of that river system above the dam. And that will be especially important in building ecological resilience in this time of climate change. This is going to require help from everyone, and it will mean sitting down and working through our options. We'll also recognize the importance of those who have lived with this river from time immemorial. These are the indigenous people and the indigenous sovereign of our region.
Ratepayers of the Okanogan Public Utility District have varying opinions about leaving the dam in the river or taking it out.
But these people who want to remove the dam don't understand. If you remove the dam, you have to replace the falls that the dam took out. Most of the people that are talking about taking the dam out and putting fish back in it in the Similkameen River are talking about changing something that didn't exist for the previous 10 or 12,000 years, and they want to change it. And that's not right.
That's been controversial ever since I moved here in 1979. Was the objection that the dam was blocking the fish run, and there were people at that time, I can remember Webb Hallauer showing me a photo of the falls pre-dam and insisting that the falls themselves kept the fish run from occurring. So I think that has to be established in a credible way so that we really know what the opportunities are there, and that we really know what the buildup of pollutants is behind the dam.
A slow process of dam removal, sediment removal, spread over time is the least impact on the riverbed and on the ratepayers and the total cost of the project. If the water can be, if the lake behind the dam can be dewatered slowly, if that sediment is not toxic, then that sediment can be spread over existing lands near the site, could even stay in place in areas and be reclaimed, so that the impact would be lessened on the river flow. And so I think the key here is the dam has been there a long time. As long as we have a plan that removal is in the process, that removal plan can be spread over a long time.
Some people feel the dam and sediment are a liability to the ratepayers and needs to be removed, particularly if financial support can be secured.
I think the dam may have worked for people 100 years ago, but it doesn't. It's not going to work for us now. It isn't feasible, and so I think that the dam needs to be removed. And I know that there will be a cost there, although I certainly don't want us here in Okanogan Valley to have to bear the complete cost of that. Some of the cost, but it seems like it would be something that would be shared nationally.
Other people have known the river as always having the dam to look at and like the aesthetics of the water falling over the face of the dam.
The dam in place is a beautiful thing to see. It's always, from the first year I moved here, it's always been a favorite place to visit just because it's such a spectacle.
A river is an environment in constant motion. This inherent energy has been harnessed to generate electricity and redirect water to irrigate lands beyond the reach of its floodplain. However, when a river's rudimentary characteristic has been altered, but the human interests are not realized, isn't there a responsibility to reinstate the natural value of the river, to allow river to deliver nutrients and gravels to reaches downriver from the landscapes it drains? to allow native species to ascend the aquatic channel and utilize habitat that was formerly accessible, allowing the species of the river to increase in numbers and become more resilient to future stressors, to allow future generations to experience the fluvial beauty and its inhabitants. If the Similkameen River is to flow freely and restore benefits to both natural and human resources, it can only be accomplished by awareness, interest, and effort by humans to remove Enloe Dam. So, the reasons Enloe Dam remains in the river are: the Okanogan Public Utility District Commissioners do not want the ratepayers to pay for removal, approximately $40 to $70 million. However, they spent approximately $22 million to pursue re-electrifying Enloe Dam at the repeated voiced opposition of ratepayers. The result of the multi-million-dollar investment was the realization that energy produced at Enloe Dam would be 6 times the cost to produce it at Wells Dam on the Columbia River. Secondly, the Okanogan PUD has offered to sell the dam for $1, but the buyer must accept the liability of the structure and the chemical contents of the sediment that is accumulated in the reservoir. This offer is unlikely to be accepted, and consequently the PUD will retain ownership of the dam and the liability associated with the structure and associated sediment. Since it is unlikely that any entity would purchase the dam, the removal of the dam will be the responsibility of the PUD and consequently financed by ratepayers of Okanogan County. The PUD needs to recognize the most realistic pathway to remove liability associated with the dam would be to remove the dam. In order to defray the cost of dam removal to ratepayers of Okanogan County, the PUD needs to request support from other funding sources, some of which have mitigation responsibilities and hence a genuine interest.
One thing for sure is that the ratepayers, the public, the local residents cannot afford to take this on. There's going to have to be some way of finding a deep pocket if we're talking about habitat improvement and eliminating pollutants. Then there are ways outside of just saddling the ratepayers with this.
It is not a matter of if, it's a matter of when Enloe Dam will be removed, either by human intervention or by nature. It is more prudent to remove this obsolete structure when financial opportunities exist, and a measured removal process can be implemented than by a random failure, which would likely have natural and human resource consequences.
Rivers are mighty, but in this case, the Similkameen is dependent upon humans for help. If the river is to be free to flow as nature intended, to nurture all life within its watershed, it needs us to speak on its behalf. Humans have dammed the river. Humans have the ability and will to set the river free. Then we can live together in harmony as we once did before the industrial age. To free the Similkameen River, contact the Okanogan Public Utility District Commissioners. Let them know you want them to work with the tribes and other agencies to support the removal of Enloe Dam. Urge the commissioners to seek resources, financial and technical support to remove the dam in an efficient and responsible manner with reduced financial burden to the ratepayers who have repeatedly voiced their opposition to energizing Enloe Dam.
Upon your banks are fishermen